On this very special day of 9/11, I wanted to celebrate and honor the hieroglyph of the human soul, this room, my studio, which I began painting on 9/11, 2001, when the towers came down. And it was a moment that, like this room, was completely unexpected. I could never set out to paint this, but I wanted to show that it has turned into, over the 20 years, into an environment that tells us the story of what does it mean to be human. A mural of the journey of the human soul and the question of how do we find our way home? How can we stop fighting with our neighbor and begin to concentrate on the questions of, well, what do I love? And if I love, what am I the custodian for? What are my responsibilities? And so 9/11, I fell on my knees. This was not painted at all. It was just a linoleum floor. And as I did, out of my pen emerged what revealed itself as the Watcher language. And the Watcher language, simply put, is a language of energy and entity, meaning that as I follow it, it starts to weave, much like following a jazz riff as a musician, into a larger and larger form. And this is what happened here, because the first being, the first entity, the first mythic figure, because all of this will deal with myth. It'll deal with the stories and figures from our religions, our folklores, our philosophies, because it's trying to say the last question, I need you on your knees. I need you off the scaffolding and shouting at God. I need you to tell the stories you want to tell your children, because even if you're on your knees, even if you're humble, you know what? Being human does matter. And that's why I so believe in our arts, because we don't teach, we don't proselytize, we offer. And so oftentimes I begin here when people visit, I say, well, let's begin on the floor. More in a child state, when we're not trying to be above something, but actually with something. And I truly believe that as it all began with this emergence of the Chinese mother goddess Kuan Yin, that she started to tell a story that we are whole and holy. And the last question is, how do we find our way home? And how do we do it in a way that includes all of the stories? And that's why as you look around, you realize it's a library. What better symbol of who we are as human than to say, well, we are all the books, all the stories. Because to be human is a unique story, a unique book. But who we are is composed of all of it. We are the outcome of all that has gone before us. This is why the story of generation, and this is why this is in my home. Home tells us a very different story than industrial space, business space, religious space, community space. At home, you are private, you are intimate, and you are naked, meaning that you are not defended in the way you are in the world. So your questions must be more intimate. And this is why, much to my surprise, as the story moved and we saw the emergence here of Sophia, the great Mother Sophia, and the blossom, and her story is, to know who you are, you must see through my eyes. And here I am on my knees, not looking down, but actually beginning to restore intimate relationship. And in this energy, we learn that certain questions, meaningful questions, have to be asked with love. They have to be asked with the willingness to protect what is revealed. Again, this is my home. I will protect what I love. I will protect my home. There are boundaries. It's important for certain things we want to know now about ourselves. And she takes us up to the chalice, over the spines of the books of religion, and starts to tell the story that through birth, we are each woven of a great question. What does it mean to be human? And why this is so significant is I didn't plan any of it. I didn't sit and say, oh, this would be very clever if I realized that when we turn the corner, this happens. It's much more vital than that. It's the discovery I'm sure a composer makes when the symphony finally reveals all of those notes have a majesty beyond even his or her imagining. And that's why the room I wanted to share on 9/11, because it's enormous. It's the entire environment. It is the floor, the ceiling, the walls, the books, as if to say, we're going to put it together in a way we can live with. And the greater ideal, well, that actually happened here with this story and reemergence of Christos, or the Christ Sophia, wisdom and love. And when we don't look at that religiously, we look at it intimately. We begin to recognize that we are indeed the outcome of all of this. That 9/11 was the collapse of an old agreement that could no longer hold its old erections and fell, leaving us on our knees with the question, what do we do now? And 20 years later, I have to say this is very much mirrored in a professor friend of mine. She said, Leigh, you managed to respond to an act of destruction and tragedy with an act of creation and optimism. And this is what I want to share on 9/11 with you. A sense that the journey's always been difficult, but it's also been the foundation for art and a greater love that comes from finally realizing it's not what you're against, but what you're for. It's not to be a critic of the neighbor, but a gardener of the human soul. That's why this is called the hieroglyph, the picture of the human soul. And it's a big story.